The desert wind carried dust, blood, and a woman who wasn't supposed to survive the night. 3 riders threw her body at Colt Mercer's feet like garbage, called it payment for a debt he never agreed to, then vanished into the dark before he could even pull his gun. She was Apache. She was dying, and the moment he looked into her eyes, everything he'd buried for the last 10 years came roaring back to life. This is a story about guilt that won't stay quiet, a choice that destroyed everything, and 2 people who had no reason to trust each other but did it anyway. Stay with me till the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The cabin smelled like dust and old regret. Colt Mercer had gotten used to both. He sat at the edge of his porch with a tin cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, watching the sun bleed out across the horizon. The land stretched flat and cracked in every direction, dotted with sagebrush that looked more dead than alive. His horse, a gray mare named Ash, stood tied near the water trough, flicking her tail at flies that didn't seem to care how little there was left to bite. It was quiet. It had been quiet for years. Colt liked it that way. He didn't talk much anymore. Didn't see people unless he had to ride into town for supplies, and even then he kept his head down, paid fast, and left faster. Folks in Cedar Bend knew his name, but not much else, and that was fine by him. He wasn't looking for friends. Wasn't looking for anything, really, except maybe the bottom of the next bottle, and a few more days of not thinking too hard about the past. The past had teeth, though. It didn't let go just because you ignored it. Colt drained the last of the coffee, grimaced, and stood. His knees popped. His back ached in that dull, persistent way that reminded him he wasn't 30 anymore. He was 42, though some days he felt closer to 60, the kind of tired that sleep didn't fix. He was halfway to the door when he heard it. Hoofbeats. 3 riders, coming fast. Colt's hand went to his belt, fingers brushing the worn grip of his revolver. He didn't draw it, not yet, but his pulse kicked up a notch, and his eyes narrowed as the shapes took form in the fading light. They weren't cavalry, weren't townsfolk either. The way they rode, loose, reckless, like men who didn't care what they trampled, told him everything he needed to know. Trouble. The lead rider was a big man, broad-shouldered and mean-looking, with a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. The other 2 were younger, leaner, but just as rough around the edges. All 3 wore dusty hats pulled low, and their horses were lathered and blowing hard. Colt stepped off the porch, keeping his stance easy, but his weight balanced. "Help you boys with something?" The scarred man grinned. It wasn't friendly. "Colt Mercer?" "Depends who's asking." "Name's Garrett." "You don't know me, but you knew my brother." Garrett swung down from his saddle, boots hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. "Lyle Garrett. You rode with him back in '69, before he got himself killed." Colt's jaw tightened. He remembered Lyle. Loud, arrogant, always looking for a fight. They'd scouted together for a few months before Colt had quit the whole damn thing and walked away. Lyle had gotten shot in a bar fight 2 years later. Colt hadn't lost sleep over it. "I knew him," Colt said. "What's that got to do with me?" Garrett's grin widened. "Before he died, Lyle lent you money. $50. You never paid him back." That was a lie. Colt had never borrowed a cent from Lyle Garrett or anyone else. He opened his mouth to say so, but Garrett raised a hand, cutting him off. "Don't matter if you remember it or not," Garrett said. "What matters is you owe me, and I'm here to collect." Colt's hand drifted closer to his gun. "I don't owe you a damn thing." "See, that's where you're wrong." Garrett gestured to one of the younger riders, who dismounted and moved toward the back of his horse. "I brought payment with me. Call it a trade." The rider dragged something off the back of the saddle, something heavy, limp, wrapped in a dirty blanket. He dropped it on the ground between them, and the blanket fell away. It was a woman. Colt's breath caught. She was Apache. That much was clear from the beadwork on her torn dress, the dark braid of her hair, the bronze tone of her skin beneath the blood and bruises. Her hands were bound in front of her, wrists rubbed raw from the rope. Her face was swollen on one side, a deep cut above her eyebrow still oozing red. She wasn't moving. "Found her a few days back," Garrett said, nudging her leg with his boot. "Figured she'd square things between us. Apache women fetch a decent price if you know where to sell 'em, or you can keep her for yourself. Don't much care." Colt stared at the woman, then back at Garrett. His pulse was pounding now, hot and sharp behind his ribs. "Get her off my land!" Garrett laughed. You don't get it, Mercer. She's yours now. Debt's paid. I didn't ask for this. Take her and go. Can't do that. Garrett swung back into his saddle, the other two riders following suit. She's your problem now. Do what you want with her. Sell her, use her, shoot her. Don't matter to me. But we're square. Colt took a step forward, his hand finally closing around the grip of his revolver. You leave her here. You'll what? Garrett's voice went cold. You're one man, Mercer. I got two boys with me and a whole lot of nothing to lose. You really want to test that? Colt didn't answer. His hand stayed on the gun, but he didn't draw. Garrett was right. 3 against 1, in the dark, with no cover. It was a bad play. Garrett tipped his hat, still grinning. Pleasure doing business with you. Then they were gone, hoofbeats fading into the night, leaving nothing but dust and silence and a woman bleeding out in the dirt. Colt stood there for a long moment, staring at her. His mind was racing, trying to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do. He could leave her, walk back inside, close the door, pretend none of this had happened. She wasn't his responsibility. He didn't owe her anything, but she was still breathing, barely. He swore under his breath, holstered his gun, and crouched beside her. Up close, the damage was worse. The cut on her forehead was deep. Her lip was split. There were bruises along her arms, her ribs, her neck. Whoever had done this hadn't held back. Hey, Colt said quietly. You hear me? No response. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat, feeling for a pulse. It was there. Faint, uneven. But there. She was alive, for now. Colt exhaled hard, then slid his arms beneath her and lifted. She was lighter than he expected, all bone and muscle and stubbornness. He carried her inside, kicking the door open with his boot, and laid her down on the narrow cot near the fireplace. The cabin was small. 1 room, a table, a chair, a stove, and not much else. It smelled like smoke and leather and years of living alone. Colt lit a lantern, then knelt beside the cot and started untying the ropes around her wrists. Her skin was torn beneath the bindings, red and raw. He worked carefully, unwinding the rope inch by inch until her hands were free. Then he grabbed a rag and a basin of water and started cleaning the blood off her face. She stirred when the rag touched the cut on her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, dark, sharp, alive despite everything, and locked onto his. Colt froze. For a second, neither of them moved. Then she jerked back, pulling away from him with a gasp, her bound hands coming up like claws. Easy, Colt said, raising his hands. I'm not going to hurt you. She didn't believe him. That much was obvious. Her breathing was ragged, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for an exit. You're safe, Colt said again, slower this time. I'm just trying to help. She said something in a language he didn't understand, Apache probably, and tried to sit up. Her face twisted in pain, and she fell back against the cot, gasping. Colt stayed where he was, hands still raised. You need to rest. You're hurt bad. She glared at him, chest heaving, but she didn't try to move again. After a moment, her eyes drifted to the ropes on the floor, then back to him. I cut you loose, Colt said. You're not tied anymore. She looked at her wrists, flexing her fingers slowly. The skin was torn, but the ropes were gone. Her gaze flicked back to him, suspicious, calculating. I'm going to clean that cut, Colt said, gesturing to her forehead. Then I'll get you some water. You don't have to trust me. Just don't fight me. Not tonight. She didn't answer. But she didn't pull away when he reached for the rag again. Colt worked in silence, wiping the blood from her face, her neck, her hands. She watched him the whole time, tense and wary, like she expected him to turn on her any second. He didn't blame her. She had no reason to trust him. Hell, she had no reason to trust anyone. When he was done, he poured a cup of water from the pitcher on the table and held it out to her. She hesitated, then took it, her hand shaking as she brought it to her lips. She drank slowly, carefully, like she wasn't sure it was real. Colt sat back on his heels, watching her. Now that the blood was cleaned off, he could see her face more clearly. She was young, mid-20s maybe, but there was something old in her eyes, something hard and unbroken. What's your name? He asked. She didn't answer. I'm Colt, he said, pointing to himself. Colt Mercer. Still nothing. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. This was going to be harder than he thought. You can stay here tonight, he said. I'll sleep outside. In the morning, we'll figure out what to do." She tilted her head slightly, like she was trying to decide whether he was lying. Then she set the cup down and turned her face away from him, closing her eyes. Colt stood, grabbed a blanket from the corner, and tossed it over her. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge him. Just lay there, breathing slow and shallow, like she was already somewhere else. He stared at her for a moment longer, then turned and walked out. The desert air hit him cold and sharp. He sat down on the porch, leaned back against the wall, and stared up at the sky. The stars were bright tonight, scattered across the black like broken glass. He didn't know what he'd just gotten himself into. Didn't know who she was, where she'd come from, or what kind of trouble was going to follow her. But he knew one thing for sure. His quiet life was over. The next morning, Colt woke to the smell of smoke. He bolted upright, hand going for his gun, but stopped when he saw her standing by the stove. She'd wrapped the blanket around her shoulders like a shawl, and she was stirring something in a pot, coffee, from the smell of it. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable, then went back to stirring. Colt stood slowly, keeping his movements calm. "You didn't have to do that." She didn't answer. He crossed the room and poured himself a cup. The coffee was strong, bitter, exactly the way he liked it. He took a sip, then looked at her over the rim of the cup. "You feeling better?" She set the spoon down and turned to face him. For the first time she spoke, halting, accented, but clear. "Why you help me?" Colt blinked. He hadn't expected her to speak English. "Didn't seem right to leave you out there." "You white man! White men not help Apache." "Yeah, well." He took another sip. "Maybe I'm not like other white men." She studied him, her dark eyes sharp and searching. Then she said, "My name, Ayla." "Ayla," Colt repeated. "All right, nice to meet you." She didn't smile, didn't soften, but something in her posture shifted, just a fraction, like maybe she was starting to believe he wasn't going to kill her. "You hurt bad?" Colt asked, nodding toward the bruises on her arms. "I live," Ayla said simply. "That's not what I asked." She frowned, then looked away. "Ribs hurt, head hurt, but I walk." "Good. You're going to need to walk if you want to get out of here." Her head snapped back toward him. "You send me away?" "No," Colt said. "But those men who brought you here, they're going to come back, or someone else will. You're not safe here." "Not safe anywhere," Ayla said quietly. Colt didn't have an answer for that. They drank their coffee in silence. Outside, the sun was climbing higher, burning off the cool night air and turning the desert into a furnace. Colt could already feel the heat pressing against the walls. "We should change those bandages," he said, gesturing to her wrists. Ayla hesitated, then nodded. Colt pulled out the medical kit he kept in the corner, mostly clean rags and a bottle of whiskey, and sat down at the table. Ayla sat across from him, holding out her hands. He worked quickly, unwrapping the old cloth and dabbing whiskey on the torn skin. She didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, just watched him with that same intense, unblinking stare. "You do this before," she said. "What?" "Fix wounds. You know how." Colt shrugged. "Used to scout for the army. You learn to patch people up when there's no doctor around." "You soldier?" "Was, long time ago." "Why you stop?" Colt's hand stilled for a second. Then he wrapped a fresh bandage around her wrist and tied it off. "Got tired of following orders." Ayla tilted her head. "You run away." "Something like that." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I run too." Colt looked up at her. "From who?" "White men, soldiers. They come to my village, take women, kill men who fight." Her voice was flat, emotionless, but her hands were clenched tight in her lap. "I fight. They tie me, sell me." Colt's chest tightened. He'd heard stories like this before. Hell, he'd seen it happen. The army didn't always play fair, and there were plenty of men, soldiers and civilians alike, who saw Apache women as property, not people. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Ayla's eyes flicked to his. "Sorry not bring back dead." "No," Colt agreed. "It doesn't." They sat in silence for a while longer. Then Ayla pulled her hands back, flexing her fingers, testing the bandages. "You good man," she said finally. "Strange, but good." Colt huffed a short laugh. Don't know about that. You cut rope. You give water. You fix hands. That good. Or maybe I'm just too tired to be anything else. Ayla frowned, like she didn't quite understand. Then she stood, wincing slightly as her ribs protested, and walked over to the window. She stared out at the empty land, her expression distant. I need go home, she said. Where's home? North, mountains, my people there? Colt stood and joined her at the window. That's a long ride, and there's a lot of folks between here and there who'd kill you on sight. I know. She glanced at him. You take me? Colt stared at her. You don't even know me. I know you not leave me die. That enough. He wanted to say no, wanted to tell her it was too dangerous, that he couldn't afford to get tangled up in something like this. But when he looked at her, bruised, battered, still standing, he couldn't get the words out. I'll think about it, he said finally. Ayla nodded, like that was all she'd expected. Then she turned back to the window, silent again. Colt watched her for a moment longer, then walked outside. The sun was climbing higher now, brutal and unforgiving. He grabbed his hat from the porch and pulled it low over his eyes, then headed toward the barn to check on Ash. The mare nickered when she saw him, nudging his shoulder with her nose. Colt scratched behind her ears, letting the familiar motion calm his racing thoughts. He'd spent the last 10 years trying to disappear, trying to outrun the guilt, the memories, the weight of everything he'd done and everything he hadn't. And for a while, it had worked. Out here, alone, there was nothing to remind him of who he used to be. But now there was a woman in his cabin, a woman who'd been beaten, sold, and left for dead. A woman who looked at him like maybe, just maybe, he was something other than the broken, hollowed-out shell he'd convinced himself he was. And that scared the hell out of him, because the last time someone had needed him, he'd failed, spectacularly, irreversibly. Colt closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against Ash's neck. His brother's face flickered through his mind, young, smiling, trusting. I'm not doing this again, he muttered. But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. What? By midday, the heat was unbearable. Colt spent most of the afternoon outside, fixing the fence line and trying not to think about the woman inside his cabin. It didn't work. Every time he glanced back at the house, he saw her silhouette in the window, watching the horizon like she was waiting for something. Or someone. When the sun finally started to dip, Colt headed back inside. Ayla was sitting at the table, her hands folded in front of her. She looked up when he entered. You decide? She asked. Colt pulled off his hat and tossed it onto the chair. Decide what? You take me home. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. No, it's not. He sat down across from her. You don't know what's out there. The Army's got patrols all over these parts. If they see you with me, they'll arrest us both, or worse. Then we go at night. Ayla, you scared? Her eyes were steady, challenging. Colt's jaw tightened. Yeah, I'm scared. I've seen what happens to people who help Apaches. It doesn't end well. Then why you help me now? He didn't have an answer for that. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't want to say it out loud. Ayla leaned forward, her voice quieter now. I not ask you die for me. I ask you help me go home. If you say no, I go alone. But I think, you not man who say no. Colt stared at her, his chest tight. She was right. He wasn't. As much as he wanted to be, as much as he tried to convince himself he wasn't the kind of man who could turn his back on someone who needed help, even if it killed him. All right, he said finally, I'll take you. But we do it my way. Slow, careful, and we avoid every town between here and the mountains. Understood? Ayla nodded, a flicker of something, relief, maybe, crossing her face. Understood. We leave in 2 days. That'll give you time to heal up a little more. I ready now. You're not. Colt stood. 2 days. That's final. She frowned but didn't argue. Colt turned toward the stove, pulling out a pan and some dried meat. You hungry? Yes. Good. Then sit down and rest. You're going to need your strength. Ayla watched him for a moment, then settled back into her chair. And for the first time since she'd woken up in his cabin, she almost smiled. Almost. Those 2 days passed slower than any Colt could remember. He kept himself busy, checking traps, mending harnesses, sharpening tools that didn't need sharpening, but his mind was never far from the woman inside his cabin. Ayla moved quietly through his space like she was trying not to disturb the dust. She didn't talk much, but she watched everything. The way he moved, the way he worked, the way he avoided her eyes when the silence got too heavy. On the second morning, Colt found her outside at dawn, standing barefoot in the dirt with her arms raised toward the rising sun. Her eyes were closed, her lips moving in words he couldn't hear. He didn't interrupt. Just stood on the porch with his coffee and watched until she lowered her arms and turned back toward the cabin. "You pray?" he asked. "I give thanks," Ayla said, "for sun, for breath, for man who cut rope." Colt looked down into his cup. "Don't thank me yet. We haven't made it anywhere." "We will." He wished he had her certainty. By midday they were packed. Colt didn't have much to bring: a bedroll, some dried food, a canteen, his rifle, and the revolver on his hip. Ayla had even less: just the clothes on her back and a small leather pouch she'd tied around her waist. Colt didn't ask what was in it. He saddled Ash and checked the straps twice, then helped Ayla up onto the mare's back. She moved stiffly, her ribs still tender, but she didn't complain. Colt swung up behind her, settling into the saddle with the reins in one hand. "You ready?" he asked. Ayla nodded. Colt nudged Ash forward, and they rode out into the desert. The land stretched empty and brutal in every direction. The sky was a hard, bright blue, and the sun beat down without mercy. Colt kept them moving at a steady pace, not too fast, not too slow. He didn't want to wear Ash out, and he didn't want to draw attention. Out here, speed meant desperation, and desperation meant trouble. They rode in silence for the first hour. Ayla sat stiff in front of him, her back straight, her hands gripping the saddle horn. Colt could feel the tension in her, the way she held herself like she was ready to bolt at any second. "You can relax," he said finally. "We're not going to run into anyone out here." "You know this?" "No, but I'm pretty good at guessing." She didn't relax. By late afternoon, they reached a shallow creek bed lined with cottonwoods. Colt reined Ash to a stop and dismounted, then helped Ayla down. She winced as her feet hit the ground, one hand going to her ribs. "We'll rest here for a bit," Colt said. "Let Ash drink." Ayla nodded and walked over to the creek, kneeling beside the water. She cupped her hands and brought the water to her face, then drank deeply. Colt watched her for a moment, then turned his attention to Ash, loosening the saddle and checking her hooves. "How far to town?" Ayla asked. Colt glanced up. "Cedar Bend? About 3 miles east. Why?" "You said we go there." "I said we might go there, if we need supplies." "We need supplies now?" "Not yet." Colt straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. "But we will eventually. Can't live off jerky and creek water forever." Ayla stood, water dripping from her hands. "Town not safe for me." "No," Colt agreed. "It's not, but it's also the only place we can get what we need. Then we go at night. That'll make it worse. People see someone sneaking around in the dark. They shoot first and ask questions later." He met her eyes. "We go during the day. You stay close to me, keep your head down, and we don't talk to anyone we don't have to." Ayla frowned. "You think they let Apache woman walk in town?" "I think if you're with me, they'll think twice before doing anything stupid." "Why? You important man?" Colt laughed, short and bitter. "No. But I'm a white man with a gun, and that counts for something out here." Ayla's expression darkened. "You use gun on them?" "If I have to." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You strange man, Colt Mercer." "Yeah," Colt said. "I've been told." They stayed by the creek until the sun started to sink, then mounted up again and rode east toward Cedar Bend. The closer they got, the tighter Colt's chest felt. He'd been avoiding this town for months, and for good reason. People there didn't like him much. He'd made it clear a long time ago that he didn't care about their opinions, their politics, or their problems, and they'd returned the favor by treating him like a ghost. He came, he bought what he needed, he left. That was the arrangement. But bringing Ayla with him? That was going to change things. The town came into view just as the sun touched the horizon. Cedar Bend wasn't much. A main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a livery stable, and a church at the far end. There were maybe 100 people living there, most of them farmers or ranchers trying to scrape a living out of the hard ground. Colt reined Ash to a stop at the edge of town and glanced back at Ayla. "You sure you want to do this?" "We need supplies," she said. "That's not what I asked." Ayla's jaw tightened. Sure." Colt sighed, then nudged Ash forward. They rode slowly down the main street, and it didn't take long for people to notice. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. A woman standing outside the general store pulled her children inside and shut the door. A man leaning against the saloon straightened up, his hand drifting toward the gun on his hip. Colt ignored them all. He kept his eyes forward, his posture calm, his hand resting lightly on his thigh near his revolver. Ayla sat rigid in front of him, her face blank, but he could feel her breathing quicken. They made it halfway down the street before someone stepped in front of them. It was a young man, maybe 25, wearing a dusty blue uniform and a wide-brimmed hat. Cavalry. Colt recognized the insignia on his shoulder. Lieutenant. The man's face was clean-shaven and sunburned, his eyes hard and suspicious. "Hold up," the lieutenant said, raising a hand. Colt pulled Ash to a stop. "Problem?" The lieutenant's eyes were on Ayla. "That an Apache?" "She's with me." "That's not what I asked." Colt's jaw tightened. "Yeah, she's Apache." The lieutenant stepped closer, his hand on his belt. "What's she doing in town?" "Same thing I am, getting supplies." "We don't allow Apaches in Cedar Bend." "I didn't see a sign." The lieutenant's expression hardened. "Don't get smart with me, Mercer. You know the rules." "I know you don't have any jurisdiction here. This isn't a fort." "I got jurisdiction wherever I say I do." The lieutenant reached up and grabbed Ash's bridle. "This woman's coming with me." Ayla stiffened. Colt's hand moved toward his gun, slow and deliberate. "Let go of my horse," Colt said quietly. "Or what?" "Or I'll make you." The street went dead silent. Colt could feel every eye on them now, watching, waiting. The lieutenant's hand stayed on the bridle, but his other hand drifted toward his sidearm. "You threatening an officer?" the lieutenant asked. "I'm telling you to let go of my horse." The lieutenant's face flushed red. "You got no idea what you're doing, Mercer. You bring an Apache into town, you're asking for trouble. She's not causing trouble. You are. She's a fugitive. You got proof of that?" The lieutenant hesitated. "She's Apache. That's proof enough." Colt's eyes went cold. "Let go of my horse." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the lieutenant's hand twitched toward his gun, and Colt drew. The revolver was out and aimed at the lieutenant's chest before the younger man's fingers even touched his holster. The lieutenant froze, eyes wide, his breath coming fast. "Go ahead," Colt said softly. "Give me a reason." The lieutenant's hand slowly lifted away from his gun. "You're making a mistake." "Wouldn't be the first time." "Captain's going to hear about this." "Good. Tell him I said hello." Colt nudged Ash forward, forcing the lieutenant to step back. "Now get out of my way." The lieutenant moved aside, his face twisted with anger and humiliation. Colt kept his gun out as they rode past, his eyes scanning the crowd. No one else moved. No one else spoke. They made it to the general store without another word. Colt dismounted and helped Ayla down, then tied Ash to the hitching post. Ayla stayed close to him, her eyes darting around the street like a cornered animal. "You all right?" Colt asked. She nodded, but her hands were shaking. Colt pushed open the door to the general store and stepped inside. The shopkeeper, a thin, gray-haired man named Cowboy, looked up from behind the counter, his eyes widened when he saw Ayla. "Mercer," Cowboy said slowly, "what the hell are you doing?" "Buying supplies," Colt said. "You still sell those, or did that change?" Calloway's gaze flicked to Ayla, then back to Colt. "You can't bring her in here." "Why not?" "Because she's Apache. Yeah, I know. She's also a human being who needs food and water, same as anyone else." Colt stepped up to the counter and pulled out a handful of coins. "Now, are you going to sell me what I need, or do I have to go somewhere else?" Calloway stared at him for a long moment, then sighed and shook his head. "You're going to get yourself killed one of these days, Mercer." "Probably." Calloway started pulling items off the shelves: flour, beans, coffee, dried meat, a few cans of peaches. Colt added a tin of salve and a roll of fresh bandages. Ayla stood near the door, her arms crossed, watching the street through the window. That everything? Calloway asked. For now. Calloway tallied up the cost, and Colt paid. As he gathered the supplies into a sack, Calloway leaned in close and lowered his voice. That lieutenant you pulled a gun on? His name's Hayward. He's been itching for a fight ever since he got stationed here. You just gave him one. He started it. Don't matter. He's cavalry. You're not. And he's not the type to let something like this slide. Colt met Calloway's eyes. I'll deal with it. You better, because next time he won't come alone. Colt nodded, grabbed the sack, and turned toward the door. Ayla stepped aside to let him pass, then followed him out into the fading light. They were halfway to Ash when Colt heard boots on the wooden planks behind them. He stopped, his hand going to his gun, and turned. It was Hayward, and he'd brought 3 soldiers with him. Mercer, Hayward said, his voice loud enough to carry down the street. I'm placing you under arrest for threatening an officer and harboring a fugitive. Colt set the sack down slowly. That's so. Step away from the horse. I don't think I will. Hayward's jaw tightened. This is your last chance. Funny, Colt said. I was about to say the same thing to you. Hayward's hand went to his gun, and Colt drew again, faster this time, smooth and practiced. The revolver came up and leveled at Hayward's face before any of the soldiers could react. Tell your boys to stand down, Colt said quietly. Hayward's face went pale. You won't shoot me. You sure about that? Hayward wasn't. Colt could see it in his eyes, the flicker of doubt, the sudden realization that maybe he'd pushed too far. Stand down, Hayward said through gritted teeth. The soldiers hesitated, then stepped back. Colt kept his gun trained on Hayward as he backed toward Ash. Ayla was already mounted, her eyes wide but focused. Colt swung up behind her, his gun still out. You're a dead man, Mercer, Hayward said. Maybe, Colt said, but not today. He spurred Ash hard, and they bolted down the street, leaving Hayward and his soldiers standing in the dust. They rode hard for the first mile, Colt's heart pounding in his chest. He could hear Ayla's ragged breathing, feel the tension in her body as she gripped the saddle horn. Behind them, the town was already fading into the distance, but Colt didn't slow down. Not yet. When they finally crested a low hill, Colt reined Ash to a stop and looked back. No one was following. Not yet, anyway. Ayla turned to look at him, her eyes blazing. You pull gun on soldier. Yeah. You crazy. Probably. They come after us now. Yeah, Colt said again. They will. Ayla stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head. Why you do this? You not know me. You owe me nothing. Colt looked down at his hand, still gripping the reins. I don't know. Maybe I'm just tired of watching people get hurt and not doing anything about it. You think you saved me? No. I think I'm just trying not to be the kind of man who walks away. Ayla's expression softened, just a fraction. You good man, Colt Mercer. Strange, but good. Colt didn't answer. He just turned Ash north and kept riding. They traveled through the night, putting as much distance between themselves and Cedar Bend as they could. The desert was dark and cold, the stars bright overhead. Colt kept them moving at a steady pace, stopping only to let Ash rest and drink from the canteen. Ayla dozed off and on, her head nodding forward, then jerking back up. Colt could feel her exhaustion in the way she slumped against him, her body finally giving in to the weight of everything she'd been through. Just before dawn, they reached a cluster of rocks that formed a natural shelter. Colt reined Ash to a stop and dismounted, then helped Ayla down. She stumbled, and he caught her, steadying her with one hand. We'll rest here, he said. Ayla nodded, too tired to argue. Colt unsaddled Ash and tethered her to a low scrub bush, then spread out his bedroll in the shelter of the rocks. Ayla sat down heavily, leaning back against the stone, her eyes already closing. Colt settled down a few feet away, his rifle across his lap, and watched the horizon. The sky was starting to lighten, the stars fading one by one. He should sleep. He knew that. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Hayward's face, heard the threat in his voice. You're a dead man, Mercer. Maybe he was. Maybe he'd signed his own death warrant the moment he'd pulled that trigger. But when he looked over at Ayla, bruised and battered and still breathing, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. His brother's face flickered through his mind again, unbidden. Younger, smiling, trusting. Colt squeezed his eyes shut, trying to push the memory away, but it clung to him like smoke. He'd failed once. He wasn't going to fail again, even if it killed him. When the sun finally rose, Colt woke Ayla with a gentle shake. She blinked up at him, disoriented, then sat up slowly. "We go?" she asked. "In a bit. I want to scout ahead first, make sure no one's trailing us." Ayla nodded and reached for the canteen. Colt handed it to her, then climbed up onto the rocks and scanned the desert. The land was empty, quiet. No dust clouds, no movement, just the endless stretch of sand and scrub. He stayed up there for a while, watching, listening. When he was satisfied, he climbed back down and found Ayla checking Ash's hooves. "She all right?" Colt asked. "Yes. Strong horse?" "Yeah. She's gotten me out of more trouble than I deserve." Ayla glanced at him. "You make lot of trouble?" "Used to. Thought I was done with it." "You not done." Colt huffed a short laugh. "No, I guess not." They saddled up and rode north, following a dry riverbed that cut through the hills. The sun climbed higher, turning the air thick and heavy. Colt kept them moving, stopping only when Ash needed rest. By midday, they reached a small canyon with steep walls and a trickle of water running through the center. Colt reined Ash to a stop and dismounted. "We'll rest here until dark," he said. "It's too hot to keep moving." Ayla slid down from the saddle and walked over to the water, kneeling beside it. She splashed her face, then drank, her shoulders sagging with relief. Colt unsaddled Ash and led her to the water, then sat down in the shade of the canyon wall. He pulled out some jerky and offered a piece to Ayla. She took it and chewed slowly, her eyes distant. "You think they follow us?" she asked after a while. "Hayward?" "Yeah, he's not the type to let this go." "How long we have?" "A day, maybe 2. Depends on how fast he can get authorization to leave town." Ayla nodded, then looked at him. "You regret?" "Regret what?" "Help me. Pull gun. Make enemy." Colt was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I don't regret it." "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because you didn't deserve what happened to you, and I'm tired of pretending I don't see it." Ayla held his gaze for a long moment, then looked away. "You not like other white men. I've done plenty I'm not proud of." "But you try be better." Colt didn't know what to say to that. He'd spent so many years trying to disappear, trying to bury the parts of himself that hurt too much to face. But sitting here, in this canyon, with a woman who had every reason to hate him and didn't, he felt something shift inside him. Something small and fragile, like a candle lit in the dark. "Yeah," he said finally. "I'm trying." They rested through the hottest part of the day, neither of them speaking much. When the sun finally started to sink, Colt saddled Ash again and helped Ayla up. They rode out of the canyon and continued north, the land slowly shifting from flat desert to rolling hills dotted with juniper and pine. As the light faded, Colt started looking for a place to camp. He found a shallow depression ringed with rocks, sheltered from the wind and hidden from the road. He reined Ash to a stop and dismounted. "We'll stay here tonight," he said. Ayla slid down and stretched, wincing as her ribs protested. Colt noticed but didn't say anything. He unsaddled Ash, then gathered some dry brush and built a small fire. The flames crackled to life, casting flickering shadows across the rocks. Ayla sat down near the fire, pulling her blanket around her shoulders. Colt settled across from her, poking at the coals with a stick. "How far to mountains?" Ayla asked. 3 days, maybe 4. Depends on how fast we can move." "And then?" "And then I take you home, like I said." Ayla frowned. "You not stay." Colt looked up at her. "With your people?" "No, that's not my place." "Why not?" "Because I'm white, and your people have every reason not to trust me." "You save me. That means something." "Maybe, but it doesn't change who I am." Ayla was quiet for a moment, then said, "You think you bad man." It wasn't a question. Colt poked at the fire again, not meeting her eyes. "I've done bad things. Everyone do bad things. That not make you bad man." "You don't know what I've done." "Then tell me." Colt's hand stilled. For a long moment he didn't say anything. Then, slowly, he set the stick down and leaned back against the rocks. "I had a brother," he said quietly. "Younger than me. His name was Daniel. Ayla waited, her eyes steady on him. He looked up to me. Thought I knew everything, could do anything, and I... Colt's voice cracked and he stopped, swallowing hard. I let him believe it. I let him follow me into places he shouldn't have gone. What happened? Colt closed his eyes. We were scouting for the army. There was a raiding party. Comanche, we thought. Command wanted us to track them, see where they were headed. I told Daniel to stay back, but he didn't listen. He wanted to prove himself. Colt's hands clenched into fists. We got ambushed. I made it out. He didn't. The silence stretched long and heavy. You not kill him, Ayla said finally. I might as well have. He was there because of me. He there because he choose. You not force him. I didn't stop him. You not his keeper. You his brother. Colt looked at her, his throat tight. He died alone. In the dirt. And I couldn't do anything to stop it. Ayla leaned forward, her eyes fierce. You carry him. Every day. I see it. But carrying him not bring him back. It only make you die too. Colt's breath hitched. He turned his face away, blinking hard against the sting in his eyes. You good man, Colt Mercer? Ayla said again, softer this time. You just not forgive yourself. Colt didn't answer. He couldn't. The weight in his chest was too heavy, the words too tangled. They sat in silence for a long time, the fire crackling between them. And for the first time in 10 years, Colt felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't carrying that weight alone. The fire had burned down to embers by the time Colt finally spoke again. His voice was rough, scraped raw by things he hadn't said out loud in years. After Daniel died, I couldn't stay with the army, couldn't look at another uniform without seeing his face. He stared into the coals, watching them pulse with dying heat. So I walked away, told myself I was done with all of it, done helping people, done making decisions that got anyone killed. Figured if I just disappeared out here, I couldn't hurt anyone else. Ayla shifted, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. That why you live alone? Yeah. You punish yourself. Colt's jaw tightened. Maybe I deserve it. No one deserved live like Ghost. He looked at her then, really looked at her. The firelight caught the angles of her face, the stubborn set of her mouth, the way her eyes held steady even when everything else had tried to break her. You don't quit, do you? He said. Quit what? Seeing the best in people. Ayla's expression darkened. I see what is. You see yourself wrong. That different. Colt wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she didn't understand, but the words wouldn't come. Because maybe she was right. Maybe he'd been looking at himself through a lens so warped by guilt that he couldn't see anything else anymore. We should sleep, he said instead. Long day tomorrow. Ayla nodded and lay down near the fire, curling onto her side. Colt stayed where he was, his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness beyond the firelight. The night was quiet except for the wind moving through the rocks and the occasional shift of Ash's hooves. He didn't sleep much. Every sound made him tense. Every shadow made his hand drift toward his gun. Somewhere out there, Hayward was coming. Colt could feel it in his bones, that certainty that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. When the first gray light of dawn touched the sky, Colt stood and stretched, his back protesting the hard ground. Ayla was already awake, sitting up with her blanket draped over her shoulders, staring east. You not sleep, she said without looking at him. Slept enough. You lie. Colt almost smiled. Yeah, I lie. They ate a cold breakfast of jerky and stale bread, then saddled Ash and headed north again. The land was changing now, rising into low hills covered with scrub oak and juniper. The air smelled different here, cleaner, sharper, with a hint of pine. Ayla sat straighter in the saddle, her eyes scanning the horizon like she was looking for something familiar. Colt could feel the shift in her, the way her body relaxed just slightly, the way her breathing steadied. You close to home? He asked. Close enough to remember. How long since you been back? 4 months? Maybe 5. Her voice went quiet. Soldiers come. Take women to sell. Kill men who fight. I run. They catch me. Colt's hands tightened on the reins. Your family? Father alive. Maybe. Brother's dead. Mother dead long time before soldiers come. I'm sorry. Ayla didn't answer. She just kept staring at the hills, her face unreadable. They rode in silence for another hour, climbing higher into the foothills. The sun was climbing too, turning the morning cool into midday heat. Colt was about to suggest they stop for water when Ash's ears swiveled forward, and she snorted. Colt reined her to an immediate stop, his hand going to his rifle. "What is it?" Ayla whispered. "Don't know. Something's got her spooked." They sat frozen, listening. At first, Colt couldn't hear anything unusual. Then, faint and distant, came the sound of hoofbeats. Multiple horses, moving fast. "Off," Colt said sharply. "Now!" Ayla swung down without hesitation, and Colt followed, grabbing Ash's reins and pulling her into a narrow gully between two rock formations. Ayla pressed herself against the stone, her breathing shallow. Colt crouched beside her, rifle in hand, and peered around the edge of the rock. The riders appeared a moment later, 5 of them, all in cavalry blue. Hayward was in the lead, his face set hard and determined. The other 4 fanned out behind him, their rifles drawn. Colt's pulse hammered in his ears. They were tracking them. Had to be. And they were close. Too close. "Stay quiet," he breathed to Ayla. She nodded, her eyes wide but steady. The soldiers rode past their hiding spot, maybe 50 yards away, moving northeast along the ridge. Colt held his breath, waiting. If any of them looked in the wrong direction, if Ash made a sound, it was over. But the riders kept going, their attention focused on the trail ahead. Colt watched until they disappeared over the next rise, then counted to 60 in his head before he moved. "They'll figure out they lost the trail soon," he said quietly. "We need to move. Fast." "Where we go?" Colt scanned the landscape, his mind racing. "There's a canyon system about 2 miles west, deep, narrow, easy to defend. If we can make it there before they double back, we might have a chance. And if we not make it, then we fight." Ayla met his eyes. "You fight for me before. I not ask you fight again." "You're not asking. I'm choosing." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. They mounted up and rode west, keeping low and moving as quietly as they could. Colt's eyes never stopped scanning the ridges, looking for movement, for dust, for anything that meant they'd been spotted. His heart was beating so hard he could feel it in his throat. The canyon entrance came into view just as the wind picked up. Colt glanced at the sky and swore under his breath. Dark clouds were building on the western horizon, moving fast. A storm was coming. "Inside," he said, urging Ash toward the narrow gap in the rocks. "Hurry!" The canyon walls rose steep and jagged on either side, closing in until there was barely room for Ash to pass. The ground was littered with loose stones and dry brush, and the air smelled like rain and dust. Colt led them deeper into the canyon, looking for a place to shelter, a place to make a stand if it came to that. They found it about a quarter-mile in, a narrow overhang carved into the canyon wall, just wide enough for them and Ash to fit beneath. Colt dismounted and helped Ayla down, then led Ash into the shelter and tied her to a sturdy root jutting from the rock. "We wait here?" Ayla asked. "For now. Storm's coming. If we're lucky, it'll wash out our tracks. And if not lucky, then we see how good Hayward is at tracking in the rain." Ayla looked out at the canyon, then back at him. "You scared?" Colt checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded. "Yeah, I'm scared." "Good. That mean you smart." He almost laughed. Almost. The storm hit less than an hour later. It came in fast and mean, the sky turning black and the wind howling through the canyon like something alive. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the dry ground to mud in minutes. Lightning cracked overhead, so close Colt could feel the static in the air. Ayla pressed herself against the back of the overhang, her eyes wide. Colt stayed near the entrance, rifle in hand, watching the canyon mouth through the rain. "You think they out there?" Ayla asked, raising her voice over the wind. "If they are, they're just as blind as we are." That not answer. "I know." The storm raged for what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 30 minutes. The rain didn't let up, and the wind didn't stop, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Colt heard something that made his blood run cold. Hoofbeats. Faint, almost swallowed by the storm, but there. He turned to Ayla, his voice low and urgent. "They're here." She went pale. "How many?" "Can't tell. Stay back." Colt moved to the edge of the overhang, peering out into the rain. At first, he couldn't see anything. Then, through the sheets of water, he saw movement, shapes on horseback, maybe 3 of them, picking their way carefully through the canyon. They were searching. Colt's hand tightened on his rifle. If they came this far, if they looked in the right direction, there was no way to hide. The overhang was shallow, and Ash was too big to miss. "Colt," Ayla whispered. "I know." He raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel, his finger hovering over the trigger. The riders were maybe 40 yards away now, moving slowly, their heads down against the rain. One of them stopped. He was looking in their direction. Colt's breath caught. The soldier nudged his horse forward, closer. 20 yards. 15. Colt's finger tightened on the trigger. Then lightning split the sky, so bright it turned everything white. The soldier's horse reared, panicked, and the rider fought to keep his seat. The other 2 riders shouted something Colt couldn't hear over the thunder, and then they were turning, riding back the way they'd come. Colt didn't lower the rifle until they were out of sight. "They gone?" Ayla asked, her voice shaking. "For now." "They come back?" Colt finally lowered the rifle and leaned back against the rock, his legs suddenly weak. "Yeah, they'll come back. Hayward's not the type to quit." Ayla moved closer to him, her face pale in the dim light. "Why he want me so bad? I just one woman." "Because you're Apache, and because I stood up to him. Men like Hayward don't let that go. It's not about you anymore. It's about proving he's in control." "So he chased us because of pride." "Yeah." Ayla shook her head, her expression bitter. "Men die for stupid reasons." "They do." The storm finally started to ease, the rain slowing to a drizzle, the wind dying down. Colt moved to the entrance of the overhang and looked out. The canyon floor was a mess of mud and standing water, and the sky was still dark, but the worst of it had passed. "We should move," he said, "before they regroup." Ayla nodded and started toward Ash, but Colt caught her arm. "Wait." She turned to him, questioning. Colt hesitated, then said, "If this goes bad, if we get cornered, you run. You understand? You don't wait for me. You don't look back. You just run." Ayla's eyes flashed. "No." "Ayla, no, you not leave me. I not leave you. I'm serious. If it comes down to it, so am I." She pulled her arm free, her voice fierce. "You saved my life. I not let you die for it. We go together or we not go at all." Colt stared at her, his chest tight. He wanted to argue, wanted to make her see reason, but the look in her eyes told him it was pointless. She'd made up her mind, and nothing he said was going to change it. "You're stubborn," he said finally. "Yes. It's going to get us both killed. Maybe. But we die standing, not running." Colt shook his head, but he couldn't stop the small, bitter smile that tugged at his mouth. "All right. We do this together." Ayla nodded, satisfied. They mounted up and rode deeper into the canyon, following a narrow trail that twisted and turned between the high rock walls. The ground was slick with mud, and Ash had to pick her way carefully, but they made steady progress. Colt kept glancing back over his shoulder, waiting for the sound of hoofbeats, the flash of blue uniforms. But the canyon stayed quiet, empty except for the drip of water from the rocks and the scrape of Ash's hooves. They rode for another hour before the canyon finally opened up into a wider basin ringed with pine trees. Colt reined Ash to a stop and scanned the area. It was defensible, with good sightlines and plenty of cover. If they had to make a stand, this was as good a place as any. "We camp here," he said, swinging down from the saddle. Ayla dismounted and looked around, her expression wary. "They find us here?" "Maybe, but I'd rather see them coming than get trapped in that canyon." She nodded and started gathering dry wood from beneath the trees. Colt unsaddled Ash and checked her over, making sure the ride hadn't lamed her. She seemed fine, just tired. He built a small fire, keeping it low and sheltered so the smoke wouldn't give them away. They ate in silence, both of them too on edge to talk. Every sound made Colt's hand drift toward his gun. Every shadow made his pulse spike. As the sun set and the light faded, Ayla finally broke the silence. "You regret?" she asked. Colt looked up. "Regret what?" "This. All of this. Me." He shook his head. "No, I told you before. I don't regret it." "Even if we die?" "Even then." Ayla studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "You different man than you think you are." "How's that?" "You think you broken. But broken things not save people. Broken things just break more." Colt's throat tightened. "Maybe I'm not as broken as I thought. Maybe you never were. Maybe you just lonely." He didn't have an answer for that. He looked down at his hands, scarred and calloused, and wondered if she was right. If all these years he'd been running from the wrong thing. The night deepened and the temperature dropped. Colt added more wood to the fire, then settled back against a tree with his rifle across his lap. Ayla lay down nearby, wrapped in her blanket, but he could tell she wasn't sleeping. Her breathing was too quick, too shallow. "You should rest," he said quietly. "So should you." "I will. In a bit." Ayla turned her head to look at him. "You think they come tonight?" "I don't know, but I'll be ready if they do." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me." Colt's chest ached. "I'm not going to give up on you, Ayla. Not now. Not ever." She held his gaze, something soft and unspoken passing between them. Then she turned away, pulling the blanket up over her shoulder, and finally closed her eyes. Colt stayed awake, watching the fire burn down, listening to the sounds of the forest, the wind moving through the pines, an owl somewhere in the distance, the faint crackle of embers, and beneath it all a silence that felt less empty than it used to. He must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing he knew, Ayla was shaking his shoulder, her voice urgent. "Colt, Colt, wake up." He jerked awake, his hand going for his rifle. "What is it?" "Horses. I hear horses." Colt was on his feet in an instant, his heart pounding. He moved to the edge of the tree line and listened. At first he couldn't hear anything. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of hoofbeats. Multiple horses, moving fast. "How many?" Ayla whispered, coming up beside him. "At least 4. Maybe more." "What we do?" Colt's mind raced. They were in the open here, exposed. If the soldiers came straight for them, there was no way to run. But if they could get to higher ground, get some cover, they might have a chance. "We move," he said. "Now, grab your things." They moved quickly, gathering their gear and saddling Ash. Colt led them toward the far side of the basin, where the ground rose into a rocky slope dotted with boulders and scrub. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. They were halfway there when the first shot rang out. The bullet hit the ground a few feet to Colt's left, kicking up dirt. He swore and pulled Ash behind a boulder, shoving Ayla down beside him. "Stay low," he shouted. Another shot cracked through the air, this one closer. Colt raised his rifle and fired back, aiming toward the tree line where the muzzle flash had come from. He didn't know if he hit anything, but it bought them a few seconds. "Move!" he said, grabbing Ayla's arm and pulling her toward the next boulder. They scrambled up the slope, using the rocks for cover, as bullets whined past them. Colt fired twice more, forcing the soldiers to keep their heads down. He could see them now, 5 riders spread out along the tree line, Hayward in the center. "Mercer!" Hayward's voice echoed across the basin. "Give up the woman and I'll let you walk away." Colt didn't answer. He just pulled Ayla behind another rock and checked his rifle. 4 rounds left. "You hear me, Mercer?" Hayward shouted. "This is your last chance." Colt glanced at Ayla. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. She wasn't crying, wasn't begging, just waiting. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. Colt turned back toward the tree line and shouted, "You want her! You're gonna have to come get her!" Hayward's response was immediate. "Fine. Have it your way." The soldiers dismounted and started moving up the slope, using the trees and rocks for cover. Colt counted them again, 5 total, all armed, all trained. The odds weren't good. He looked at Ayla. "You remember what I said about running?" "Yes. Now's the time." "No." "Ayla, I said no." She grabbed a loose rock from the ground, hefting it in her hand. "I fight." Colt wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The soldiers were closing in, and he needed to focus. He raised his rifle, sighted down the barrel, and fired. One of the soldiers dropped, clutching his leg. The others scattered, taking cover. 3 rounds left. Colt moved to a different position, keeping low, and fired again. Another soldier went down, this one not getting back up. The remaining three opened fire, and bullets ricocheted off the rocks around them. Ayla ducked, covering her head, but she didn't run. 2 rounds left. Colt's hands were shaking now, adrenaline flooding his system. He could see Hayward moving up the slope, flanking them from the left. If he got around them, it was over. Colt fired and Hayward dove behind a tree. The shot went wide. 1 round left. "Colt," Ayla said, her voice tight. "I know." He could hear the soldiers closing in, their boots crunching on the rocks. He had 1 shot left and 3 men still coming. The math didn't work. This was it. Colt took a deep breath, then stepped out from behind the boulder, rifle raised. He sighted on the nearest soldier and squeezed the trigger. The rifle clicked. Empty. Colt stared at it, his heart sinking. He'd miscounted. The soldier raised his gun and Colt braced himself for the shot. But it didn't come. Instead, a voice rang out from somewhere above them, sharp, commanding, speaking in a language Colt didn't understand. Apache. The soldiers froze, their eyes going wide. Colt turned and looked up. There, on the ridge above them, stood a line of Apache warriors. At least a dozen of them, all armed, all watching. And at the front, an older man with a scarred face and a feathered staff raised one hand. Ayla gasped. "Father!" The old man's eyes locked onto her, and something like relief flickered across his face. Then he turned his gaze to the soldiers below, and his expression went cold. He spoke again, his voice carrying across the slope. The soldiers didn't need a translation. The message was clear. Leave, now. Hayward stood frozen, his gun still raised, his face twisted with rage and fear. For a long moment, no one moved. Then one of the soldiers broke. He turned and ran, stumbling down the slope. The others followed, scrambling back toward their horses. Hayward was the last to go, his eyes burning with hatred as he stared at Colt. "This isn't over," he said. Then he turned and ran. Colt watched them go, his legs shaking so bad he had to lean against the boulder to stay upright. Ayla was staring up at the ridge, tears streaming down her face. The old man started down the slope, moving carefully, his warriors following. When he reached them, he stopped and looked at Ayla for a long moment. Then he reached out and touched her face, his voice soft. Ayla broke. She threw her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. The old man held her, his eyes closing, and Colt had to look away. When Ayla finally pulled back, the old man turned his gaze to Colt. His eyes were sharp, assessing, but not hostile. Ayla said something in Apache, gesturing to Colt. The old man listened, then nodded slowly. He spoke, and Ayla translated. "My father say, 'You save me. You risk life for Apache woman. That, not common thing.'" Colt met the old man's eyes. "She didn't deserve what happened to her. Nobody does." Ayla translated, and the old man's expression softened slightly. He spoke again, longer this time, and Ayla's voice wavered as she repeated his words. "He say, 'You welcome in our camp, as friend, as family.'" Colt's throat tightened. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The old man gestured toward the ridge, and the warriors started moving. Ayla reached for Colt's hand, her eyes still wet but smiling now. "Come," she said. "You safe now. We all safe." Colt let her lead him up the slope, his rifle hanging loose in his other hand, and for the first time in 10 years, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he'd done something right. The Apache camp sat in a hidden valley ringed by pine-covered ridges, the kind of place you'd never find unless you already knew it was there. Colt followed Ayla and her father down a narrow trail that switched back through the rocks, the warriors moving silently ahead and behind them. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the crunch of boots on stone and the wind moving through the trees. Colt's mind was still racing, trying to process what had just happened. 1 minute he'd been staring down the barrel of certain death, and the next, Ayla's people had appeared like something out of a fever dream. He kept replaying the moment Hayward had turned and run, the hatred in his eyes, the promise that this wasn't over. Colt believed him. When they reached the valley floor, Colt got his first real look at the camp. Maybe 40 structures scattered among the trees. Wickiups made of brush and hide, a few larger lodges, cooking fires sending thin trails of smoke into the air. People stopped what they were doing as the group approached. Women with children on their hips, old men sitting in the shade, younger warriors sharpening weapons. All of them stared at Colt with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright suspicion. He didn't blame them. He was a white man in the middle of an Apache camp. He'd seen what his people had done to theirs. If the roles were reversed, he'd be suspicious too. Ayla's father raised his hand and spoke, his voice carrying across the camp. Colt couldn't understand the words, but he caught the tone. Authority, calm, final. People nodded and went back to their work, though Colt could still feel their eyes on him. "My father tell them you friend," Ayla said quietly. "You not to be harmed. That's good to know. But they watch you. Trust not come easy." "I get it." Ayla's father led them to a larger wickiup near the center of the camp and gestured for Colt to enter. Colt ducked through the low entrance and found himself in a dim, smoke-scented space. A fire pit sat in the center, the embers still glowing. Blankets and hides were arranged along the walls. It smelled like sage and leather and years of living. Ayla's father sat down cross-legged near the fire and motioned for Colt to do the same. Colt lowered himself to the ground, his back protesting the movement. Ayla sat beside her father, and one of the warriors, a younger man with a hard, scarred face, took up position near the entrance. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Ayla's father studied Colt with dark, unblinking eyes, and Colt forced himself not to look away. This was a test. He knew that much. Finally, the old man spoke. Ayla translated. "My father asked why you help me. You white men not help Apache." Colt took a breath. "Because it was the right thing to do." Ayla translated. Her father's expression didn't change. He spoke again, longer this time. He say, "Many white men say they do right thing. Then they kill, steal, lie. Words easy, action hard." He asked, "What you lose to help me?" Colt thought about that. "Everything, probably. The soldiers won't forget. And there are people in my town who'll see me as a traitor now." "You have family, wife, children?" "No, nobody." "Then you lose nothing." Colt's jaw tightened. "I lost my quiet, my safety, the life I'd built out here. That might not seem like much to you, but it was all I had." Ayla's father leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. He spoke again, and Ayla hesitated before translating. He said, "Man who hide from world not living, he just waiting to die. You help me because you already dead inside, or because you want live again?" The words hit Colt like a punch to the gut. He stared at the old man, his chest tight, and realized he didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't want to say it out loud. "Both," he said finally. "I was dead inside, and then your daughter made me remember what it felt like to be alive." Ayla's voice was soft as she translated. Her father listened, then nodded slowly. He spoke again, and this time his tone was different, less testing, more thoughtful. He say, "You carry heavy thing, guilt, shame. He see it in your eyes. He say, guilt like wound. It not heal if you keep opening it. You must let it close." Colt looked down at his hands. "I don't know if I can." "Why?" "Because the person I lost, my brother, he's dead because of me. And I don't know how to live with that." Ayla's father was quiet for a long moment after she translated. Then he reached out and touched Colt's shoulder, his grip firm but not unkind. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, almost gentle. He say, "His son's dead too. Both. Killed by soldiers 3 years ago. He carry them every day, but he not let them make him stop living. He say, dead not want us suffer. They want us remember and live." Colt's throat closed up. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Ayla's father released his shoulder and sat back. He spoke to Ayla in Apache, and she nodded, then stood. "Come," she said to Colt. "I show you where you sleep." Colt got to his feet and followed her outside. The sun was starting to set, turning the sky orange and pink. Ayla led him to a smaller wickiup at the edge of the camp and pulled back the hide covering the entrance. "This for you," she said. "You rest. Eat later." Colt stepped inside. It was simple. A bedroll, a water skin, a small pile of firewood. But it was clean and dry, and after the last few days it felt like luxury. "Thank you," he said, turning back to Ayla. She stood in the doorway, backlit by the fading sun, and for a moment she just looked at him. Then she said, "You saved my life. Now my people save yours. We even." "I don't think it works like that." "Why not?" "Because I'm still here, and I'm still not sure I deserve to be." Ayla stepped closer, her expression fierce. "You good man, Colt Mercer. When you see that—" "I don't know, maybe never." "Then I see it for you, until you're ready." She turned and left before he could respond. Colt stood there for a moment, staring at the empty doorway, then sat down heavily on the bedroll. His whole body ached, his back, his legs, his chest. But it was the ache in his throat that hurt the most. He lay back and closed his eyes, and for the first time in days, he let himself sleep. When he woke, it was full dark. Voices and firelight filtered through the walls of the wickiup, and the smell of cooking meat made his stomach growl. Colt sat up, rubbing his face, and stepped outside. The camp had come alive. Fires burned in front of most of the wickiups, and people sat in clusters, talking and eating. Children ran between the structures, laughing and shouting. It felt normal, like a community, not a war camp. Ayla appeared beside him, carrying 2 wooden bowls. She handed one to him. "Eat," she said. Colt looked down at the bowl. Some kind of stew, meat, roots, something that smelled like wild onions. He took a bite, and it was good, better than good. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until the first taste hit his tongue. "Your father cooked this?" he asked. Ayla smiled. "No, I cook." "You're good at it." "I know." They sat down near one of the fires, and Colt ate in silence, watching the camp move around them. A few people glanced his way, but no one approached. Ayla sat beside him, her own bowl balanced on her knee, and for a while neither of them spoke. Finally Colt said, "How's your father? He looked hurt." Ayla's smile faded. "He hurt. Soldiers shoot him 2 months ago. Here." She touched her side just below the ribs. "He heal, but slow. He not strong like before." "I'm sorry." "Not your fault." "I know, but I'm still sorry." Ayla looked at him, her expression softening. "You always sorry, for everything, even things not yours to carry. It's a bad habit." "Yes, very bad." They finished eating, and Ayla took the bowls back to the fire. When she returned, she sat down closer to him, her shoulder almost brushing his. "Tomorrow, my father want talk to you again," she said. "He want know your plan." "My plan?" "You not stay here forever, you white. You have life somewhere." Colt looked out at the dark trees beyond the firelight. "I don't know if I have a life to go back to. Hayward's going to make sure of that." "Then you stay here." "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because I don't belong here, Ayla. This is your home, your people. I'm just passing through." Ayla's jaw tightened. "You saved my life. You stand with me when no one else do. That make you belong." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "You make it not simple." "But it is." Colt shook his head, but he didn't argue. He was too tired, and she was too stubborn, and he didn't have the energy for both. They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the fire burn down. Then Ayla stood and offered him her hand. "Come, I show you something." Colt let her pull him to his feet, and she led him through the camp, past the wickiups and the fires, to a trail that climbed up the ridge. They walked in silence, the sounds of the camp fading behind them, until they reached a flat outcrop of rock overlooking the valley. The view took Colt's breath away. The stars were so bright they looked close enough to touch, scattered across the sky like broken glass. Below, the campfires glowed like tiny embers, warm and alive. "I come here when I need think," Ayla said, sitting down on the rock. "When everything too much." Colt sat beside her. "It's beautiful." "Yes." They sat in silence, the night air cool against their skin. Colt could hear the faint rustle of wind in the pines, the distant call of an owl. It was peaceful, quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty. "You think soldiers come back?" Ayla asked after a while. "Yeah, I do." "When?" "I don't know. Could be days, could be weeks. But Hayward's not the type to let this go." Ayla nodded slowly. "Then we ready?" "You sound pretty confident." "My people survive long time. We know how fight, how hide, how live when others try kill us. She glanced at him. You worry? Yeah, I worry. For me or for you? Both. Ayla was quiet for a moment, then said, You not have to worry for me. I strong. I survived before, I survive again. I know you're strong. That's not the point. Then what point? Colt looked at her, the starlight catching the angles of her face, and something shifted in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. The point is, I don't want to see you hurt, he said quietly. I don't want to see you killed because of me. Ayla held his gaze. I not killed because of you. I killed because of them. Soldiers. Men like Hayward. You not make them come. They come anyway. But I made it worse. No. You make it better. You give me chance. You give me hope. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers rough and warm. You saved me, Colt Mercer. Not just from soldiers, from giving up. Colt's throat tightened. He looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. I don't know what I'm doing, he said. No one do. We all just try. He almost smiled. Almost. They sat there for a long time, holding hands under the stars, and Colt realized something he hadn't let himself think about in years. He wasn't alone anymore, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The next morning, Colt woke to the sound of voices outside his wickiup. He sat up, groggy and stiff, and stepped outside to find Ayla's father standing with a group of warriors. They were armed, bows, rifles, knives, and their faces were grim. Ayla appeared beside Colt, her expression tight. What's going on? He asked. Scout, come back. He say soldiers moving this way. Many soldiers. Colt's stomach dropped. How many? 20, maybe more. Hayward. Yes. Colt swore under his breath. 20 soldiers against 40 Apaches, most of them women, children, and elders. The odds weren't good. And if it came to a fight, people were going to die. A lot of people. Ayla's father spoke, his voice calm but firm. Ayla translated. He say we prepare. We not run. This our home. We fight if we must. There's got to be another way, Colt said. What way? I don't know. Let me think. Ayla's father studied him for a moment, then nodded. He spoke to the warriors, and they dispersed, moving quickly through the camp. Ayla's father turned back to Colt and spoke again. He say, You have 1 hour. Then we prepare for war. Colt nodded, his mind already racing. 1 hour. That wasn't much time, but it was all he had. He grabbed Ayla's arm and pulled her aside. Where's the nearest ridge with a good view of the valley entrance? East Ridge, why? Because if I can see them coming, maybe I can stop this before it starts. How? I don't know yet, but I'm not letting your people die because of me. Ayla's eyes widened. You go alone? Yeah. No, I come with you. Ayla, I said I come with you. You not argue. Colt stared at her, then sighed. Fine, but we move fast. They grabbed Ash and rode hard for the East Ridge, the morning sun climbing higher as they went. When they reached the top, Colt dismounted and moved to the edge, scanning the valley below. At first, he didn't see anything. Then, in the distance, he spotted movement. A column of riders, maybe 2 miles out, moving slowly but steadily toward the hidden valley. There, he said, pointing. Ayla peered over the edge. Many soldiers. Yeah, Colt's mind raced. He needed to stop them, needed to make them turn back. But how? He couldn't fight 20 men. And even if he could, it would just bring more soldiers down on the camp. Then an idea hit him, a stupid, reckless, probably going to get him killed idea. But it was the only one he had. I'm going down there, he said. Ayla grabbed his arm. What? No, they kill you. Maybe. But if I can talk to Hayward, if I can give him what he wants, maybe he'll leave your people alone. What do you want? Me? No, he wants me. I embarrassed him, stood up to him. If I turn myself in, he'll have what he came for. Then he kill you. Probably. Ayla's grip tightened. No, I not let you do this. It's not your choice. Yes, it is. You my... She stopped, her voice breaking. You my friend. You save me. I not let you die. Colt looked at her, his chest aching. Ayla, if I don't do this, everyone in that camp is at risk. Your father, the children, everyone? I can't live with that. And I not live with you dead? You'll have to. He pulled his arm free and swung up onto Ash. Ayla grabbed the reins, her eyes blazing. You stupid man, you go down there, you die. That not save anyone. Maybe not. But it's the only play I've got. Ayla stared at him for a long moment, her face twisted with anger and fear. Then she let go of the reins and stepped back. Then I come with you. No. You not stop me. Colt wanted to argue, but he could see it in her eyes. She wasn't backing down. Not this time. Fine, he said. But you stay behind me, and if this goes bad, you run. Understand? I understand. I mean it, Ayla. So do I. Colt sighed, then nudged Ash forward. They rode down the ridge, moving carefully, and headed toward the column of soldiers. Colt's heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his ears. This was insane. He was riding straight toward 20 armed men who wanted him dead, but he couldn't think of another way. When they were about 100 yards out, one of the soldiers spotted them and shouted. The column stopped, and the men started spreading out, rifles raised. Colt reined Ash to a stop and raised his hands, showing he wasn't armed. Ayla did the same beside him. Hayward rode forward, his face twisted with rage. You got a lot of nerve, Mercer. I'm not here to fight, Colt said. That's real funny considering you pulled a gun on me twice. I know, and I'm here to make it right. Hayward's eyes narrowed. How's that? You want me, right? I embarrassed you, stood up to you. So here I am. Take me in. Do whatever you want. Just leave the Apache camp alone. Hayward stared at him, then started to laugh. It was a cold, ugly sound. You think I care about you, Mercer? You're nothing, a washed-up drunk living in the middle of nowhere. Then why are you here? Because you harbored a fugitive. Because you threatened an officer. Because you made me look weak in front of my men. Hayward's smile widened. And because I'm going to enjoy watching you hang. Colt's stomach twisted. So take me. Let the woman go. No, she's coming too. She's Apache. That makes her property of the U.S. government. She's not property. She's a person. Not according to the law. Ayla's voice was steady, cold. I not go with you. Hayward's eyes flicked to her. You don't get a choice? Yes, I do. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a small knife. Before Colt could stop her, she pressed the blade to her own throat. You take me. I kill myself, she said. Right here. You get nothing. Hayward's smile faltered. You're bluffing. Try me. The two of them stared at each other, and Colt's heart stopped. He could see it in Ayla's eyes. She meant it. She would do it. Ayla, he said quietly. Don't. I not let them take me, she said, her voice shaking but firm. I not let them use me. I die free or I not die at all. Hayward's face went red. You're insane. Maybe, but I serious. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Hayward's hand drifted toward his gun, and Colt's blood ran cold. Don't, Colt said. Hayward ignored him. He drew his revolver and aimed it at Ayla. Colt moved without thinking. He threw himself off Ash and tackled Hayward, both of them hitting the ground hard. The gun went off, the shot going wild, and then Colt was on top of him, fists swinging. He got in 2 good hits before the other soldiers dragged him off. They threw him to the ground, and Colt felt the barrel of a rifle press against the back of his head. Don't move, someone said. Colt froze, his face in the dirt, his heart pounding. He could hear Ayla shouting, struggling, but he couldn't see her. Then another voice rang out, deep, commanding, speaking in Apache. Colt turned his head just enough to see Ayla's father and his warriors emerging from the tree line. There were at least 20 of them, all armed, all ready. The soldiers froze. Ayla's father spoke again, and this time Ayla translated, her voice shaking. He say, you leave now, or you die here. Hayward got to his feet, his face bloody from Colt's punches. You threatening me? Yes. Hayward looked around, taking in the warriors, the rifles, the hard faces. Then he looked back at Ayla's father. This is U.S. territory. You're breaking the law. Ayla's father didn't flinch. He spoke again, and Ayla translated. He say, This our land, long before you come, long after you gone. You leave now, or we make you leave. Hayward's jaw worked. He glanced at his men, saw the fear in their eyes, and Colt could see the moment he realized he was outmatched. Fine, Hayward spat. But this isn't over, not by a long shot. He turned and walked back to his horse, the other soldiers following. They mounted up and rode away, and Colt didn't breathe until they were out of sight. The rifle lifted from the back of his head, and Colt pushed himself to his feet. Ayla ran to him, grabbing his arms, her face pale. "You all right?" she asked. "Yeah. You?" "Yes." Ayla's father approached, his expression grim. He spoke, and Ayla translated. He say, "You brave, but stupid." Colt almost laughed. "Yeah, I get that a lot." Say, "You willing die for us. That means something." Colt met the old man's eyes. "I wasn't going to let them hurt your people." Ayla's father nodded slowly, then reached out and gripped Colt's shoulder. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost warm. He say, "You one of us now, whether you like it or not." Colt's throat tightened. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They walked back to camp together, and Colt realized something had changed. The warriors didn't look at him with suspicion anymore. They looked at him like one of their own, and for the first time in 10 years, Colt felt like maybe he'd finally found a place where he belonged. But Colt knew better than to think it was over. Hayward's threat still hung in the air like smoke, and the way the lieutenant had looked back over his shoulder before disappearing into the trees told Colt everything he needed to know. This was just a pause, not an ending. The camp settled into an uneasy rhythm over the next few days. Sentries were posted on every ridge. Warriors took turns keeping watch through the night. Women and children stayed close to the center of the valley, and the cooking fires were kept small and smokeless. Everyone was waiting for the soldiers to come back, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Colt spent most of his time helping where he could. He wasn't much good at making weapons or hunting in this terrain, but he could chop wood, haul water, and fix things that were broken. The work kept his hands busy and his mind from spiraling into dark places. But at night, lying awake in his wickiup, he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd done, what he'd brought down on these people. Ayla found him on the third evening, sitting alone near the edge of camp, staring out at the darkening trees. She sat down beside him without asking, the way she always did. "You not sleep again," she said. "Hard to sleep when you're waiting for a fight." "My people wait all their lives. We still sleep." Colt almost smiled. "You got a point." They sat in silence for a while. Then Ayla said, "My father wants see you tomorrow, before sun." "What for?" "I not know, he not say." Colt nodded, his chest tightening. He had a pretty good idea what Ayla's father wanted to talk about. The old man was smart. He knew Colt couldn't stay here forever, and he knew that every day Colt remained put the camp at greater risk. "You think he's going to tell me to leave?" Colt asked quietly. Ayla turned to look at him, her eyes sharp in the fading light. "You think that?" "I think he's got a responsibility to his people, and I'm a problem." "You not problem. You—" "I am, Ayla. You know it as well as I do. Hayward's not coming back for your father or your people. He's coming back for me. And the longer I stay, the more danger everyone's in." Ayla's jaw tightened. "So you leave? You just go?" "I don't know. Maybe that's what your father wants to talk about." "And if it is? You just walk away?" Colt looked at her, his throat tight. "If it keeps you safe, yeah. I walk away." Ayla stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stood abruptly and walked away without another word. Colt watched her go, his chest aching, and wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. The next morning, before the sun had fully cleared the ridge, Colt made his way to Ayla's father's wickiup. The old man was already awake, sitting cross-legged near a small fire, a clay pipe in his hands. He looked up when Colt entered and gestured to the ground across from him. Colt sat. Neither of them spoke for a while. The old man took a long draw from his pipe, then exhaled slowly, the smoke curling up toward the opening in the roof. Finally he spoke. His voice was calm, measured, and even though Colt couldn't understand the words, he could hear the weight behind them. Ayla appeared in the doorway and sat down beside her father. He He grateful for what you do. You save his daughter. You stand with us when soldiers come. That mean much. Colt nodded. I did what anyone should have done, Ayla translated, and her father shook his head, speaking again. He say, no. Most men not do what you do. Most men think of themselves. You think of others. That rare. Colt looked down at his hands. He didn't feel rare. He felt tired and guilty, and like he was standing on the edge of a cliff he couldn't see the bottom of. The old man spoke again, longer this time. Ayla's voice was quieter as she translated. He say, you in danger here. Soldiers come back. Maybe soon. Maybe with more men. He say, he cannot protect you forever. His people come first. There it was, the thing Colt had been waiting for. I understand, Colt said. I'll leave today. I don't want to bring more trouble down on you. Ayla's father raised a hand, stopping him. He spoke again, and Ayla hesitated before translating. He say, you misunderstand. He not ask you leave. He ask what you want. You want stay? You want go? He give you choice. But you must choose. Colt blinked, caught off guard. I don't know. He say you must know. You cannot live between two worlds. You must choose one. Colt's chest tightened. He looked at Ayla, then back at her father. If I stay, I put everyone at risk. Yes. But if I leave, I'm just running again, like I've been running for the last 10 years. Ayla's father nodded slowly. He spoke, and Ayla's voice was soft. He say, running not always wrong. Sometimes running keep you alive. But running from yourself? That only make you dead inside. Colt's throat closed up. He stared at the old man, seeing the wisdom in his eyes, the years of pain and loss and survival written into every line of his face. I don't know how to stop running, Colt said quietly. He say, you already stop. You just not see it yet. The old man stood, slowly and carefully, and placed a hand on Colt's shoulder. He spoke one more time, and Ayla's voice wavered as she translated. He say, you welcome here, for as long as you want, but you must decide, today, before sunset. Then he left, and Colt was alone with Ayla. She didn't look at him, just stared at the fire, her arms wrapped around her knees. You gonna leave? She asked finally. I don't know. You keep saying that. Because I don't know, Ayla. I don't know what the right thing to do is anymore. Then stop thinking about right thing. Think about what you want. Colt looked at her. What I want doesn't matter. What matters is keeping you safe. You think leaving keep me safe? I think it keeps the soldiers from having a reason to come back. Ayla turned to face him, her eyes blazing. You wrong. Soldiers always have reason. They not need you. They come for us anyway. They always come. Then why should I stay and make it worse? Because I want you to. Her voice cracked, and she looked away, blinking hard. Because you only person who see me. Not Apache. Not woman. Not thing to use or sell. Just me. Colt's chest ached so bad he could barely breathe. He reached out and took her hand, and she let him, her fingers cold and shaking. I see you, he said quietly. I've always seen you. Then stay, please. Colt wanted to. Wanted it so badly it hurt. But the practical part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive for 42 years, was screaming at him that staying was selfish, that it put her in danger, that he was going to get her killed just like he'd gotten Daniel killed. I need to think, he said. Ayla pulled her hand away and stood. Then think, but think fast. Son, not wait. She left, and Colt sat alone in the wickiup, staring at the dying fire, trying to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do. He spent the rest of the morning walking the perimeter of the camp, his mind churning. Part of him wanted to saddle Ash and ride out before anyone could stop him. Just disappear into the desert and let the world forget he existed. It was what he was good at, what he'd been doing for a decade. But the other part of him, the part that had woken up when he'd cut the ropes off Ayla's wrists, didn't want to run anymore. Didn't want to spend the rest of his life hiding from his own shadow. He found himself standing on the ridge where he and Ayla had sat under the stars, The valley stretched out below him, peaceful and still. He could see the camp, the wickiups, the thin trails of smoke from the morning fires. It looked like home, and that scared the hell out of him. You decide yet? Colt turned to find one of the younger warriors standing a few feet away. His name was Na'al-Nish, and he was one of the men who'd stood with Ayla's father when the soldiers had come. He spoke broken English, but he made himself understood. "Not yet," Colt said. Na'al-Nish nodded and stepped up beside him, looking out at the valley. "You good man. You fight for us. That means something. I didn't do anything special. You stand when you could run. That's special." Colt didn't know what to say to that. Na'al-Nish was quiet for a moment, then said, "You afraid?" It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Colt admitted. "I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of failing, of getting people killed, of being the reason something bad happens." Na'al-Nish looked at him, his expression thoughtful. "You already fail before?" Colt's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I have." "And you still alive?" "Yeah." "Then you not fail all the way. You just learn." Colt stared at him. It was such a simple way of looking at it, but it hit him harder than any sermon or lecture ever could. He hadn't failed all the way. He was still here, still breathing, still capable of making a different choice. "Thank you," Colt said quietly. Na'al-Nish nodded and walked away, leaving Colt alone with his thoughts. By the time the sun started to sink toward the horizon, Colt had made his decision. He wasn't sure if it was the right one, but it was the only one he could live with. He found Ayla near the center of camp, helping an older woman repair a torn hide. She looked up when he approached, her expression guarded. "I'm staying," Colt said. Ayla's eyes widened. You stay?" "Yeah, I'm staying, for as long as you'll have me." She stood, the hide forgotten, and stared at him like she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Then she closed the distance between them and threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. Colt held her, his throat tight, and realized he was shaking. "You sure?" she whispered. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, her eyes wet but fierce. "You not regret this? Ask me in a year." She almost smiled. Almost. That night, Ayla's father called the camp together. The people gathered around the central fire, and the old man stood before them, his voice strong despite his injury. He spoke in Apache, his words measured and deliberate, and Colt didn't need a translation to understand the weight of what was being said. When the old man finished, the people turned to look at Colt. Not with suspicion this time, not with fear, with something closer to acceptance. Ayla stood beside Colt and translated quietly. "He tell them you stay. You one of us now. You fight for us. You live with us. You family." Colt's chest felt too tight to breathe. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The old man stepped forward and placed a hand on Colt's shoulder, then spoke directly to him. Ayla's voice was soft. "He say, 'Welcome home.'" Colt looked around at the faces in the firelight, men, women, children, all watching him, and felt something break open inside him, something that had been locked up for 10 years. He wasn't alone anymore. The days that followed were strange and uncomfortable, and better than anything Colt had felt in years. He learned the rhythms of the camp, the routines, the unspoken rules. He worked alongside the men, repairing weapons and building shelters, and standing watch on the ridges. The women taught him which plants were safe to eat and which ones would kill you. The children, once wary of the strange white man, started following him around, curious and bold. And Ayla was always there, helping him when he stumbled over the language, laughing when he got something wrong, sitting with him by the fire at night when the camp went quiet. "You getting better," she said one evening, watching him try to sharpen a knife the way Na'al-Nish had shown him. "I'm getting less terrible. That's not the same thing." "Close enough." Colt smiled, and it felt good, felt real, but the peace didn't last. 2 weeks after Colt had made his decision to stay, the scouts came back with news. Soldiers, a lot of them, heading toward the valley. Ayla's father called a council, and Colt sat with the warriors, listening as they debated what to do. Some wanted to fight. Others wanted to pack up and move deeper into the mountains. A few argued they should send emissaries, try to talk their way out of it. Colt listened to it all, his stomach twisting, and finally spoke up. "They're not coming for you," he said. "They're coming for me." The warriors turned to look at him. Ayla's father raised a hand and the room went quiet. "Hayward's not going to let this go," Colt continued. "He's got his pride and he's got the law on his side. He'll keep coming until he gets what he wants." "Then we give him you?" one of the warriors said, his tone sharp. "No," Ayla's father said firmly. He spoke in Apache, and Ayla translated. "We not give our family to soldiers. We fight. Together." Colt shook his head. "You fight. People die. Kids die. That's not something I can live with." "Then what you want do?" Ayla asked. Colt took a breath. "I go to them. I talk to Hayward. I make him see reason." "He not see reason," Ayla said. "He see enemy." "Maybe, but I have to try." The council erupted into argument, voices overlapping, but Ayla's father raised his hand again, silencing them. He looked at Colt for a long moment, then spoke. He say, "If you go, you not go alone. We go with you." Colt opened his mouth to argue, but the old man's expression stopped him. This wasn't up for debate. "All right," Colt said finally. "We go together." They rode out the next morning. Colt, Ayla, her father, and a dozen warriors. The plan was simple. Meet the soldiers before they reached the valley. Try to talk. And if talking didn't work, make it clear that any fight would cost both sides more than it was worth. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. They found the soldiers camped at the mouth of a narrow canyon about 5 miles south of the valley. Hayward was there, along with at least 30 men. More than Colt had expected. Colt reined Ash to a stop at the edge of the camp, the warriors fanning out behind him. Hayward stood when he saw them, his hand going to his gun, but he didn't draw, not yet. "Mercer," Hayward called, "you got a death wish?" "Just came to talk," Colt said. "I'm done talking." "Then listen." Colt dismounted and walked forward, keeping his hands visible. "You want me? Fine. I'll go with you, but you leave the Apache alone." Hayward's eyes narrowed. "That's real noble of you, but I don't think I need your permission. You attack that camp, you're going to lose men, a lot of men. Is that really worth it?" "Depends on how you look at it." "Hayward, this doesn't have to end in blood." "You're right, it doesn't. You come with me now, no fight, no fuss, and I'll leave the Apaches alone." Colt hesitated. Behind him, he could feel Ayla's eyes on him, could hear her breath catch. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" Colt asked. Hayward smiled. "You don't, but it's the best deal you're going to get." Colt's mind raced. He could do it. He could go with Hayward, let himself be arrested, maybe even hanged. It would save the camp, save Ayla, save the people who'd taken him in. But it would also mean giving up, running again, just in a different direction. "No," Colt said. Hayward's smile faded. "What?" "I said no. I'm not going with you." "Then I'll take you by force." "You can try." Hayward's face went red. He drew his gun, and the soldiers behind him followed suit. The warriors raised their rifles, and for a moment the canyon was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Then Ayla's father stepped forward. He didn't raise his weapon, just stood there, calm and steady, and spoke. His voice carried across the canyon, strong and clear. Colt didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was a challenge, a warning, a promise. Hayward stared at the old man, his gun still raised, his jaw working. "What's he saying?" Hayward demanded. Ayla stepped up beside her father and translated, her voice steady. "He say, you want fight, we fight, but you lose. You lose men, you lose face, you lose everything. We know this land, we know how survive. You just soldiers. You go home when fight over. We stay. This our home, and we not give it to you." Hayward's hand shook. "You're threatening me?" "No," Ayla said. "We promise you." The silence stretched long and unbearable. Colt could see the calculation in Hayward's eyes, the way he was weighing the cost. 30 soldiers against a dozen warriors who knew the terrain, who had nothing to lose. Finally, Hayward lowered his gun. "This isn't over," he said, his voice tight. Yes, Ayla's father said in English, the word slow and deliberate. It is. Hayward stared at him, then at Colt. Then he turned and walked back to his horse. The soldiers followed, and within minutes, they were gone. Colt stood there, his legs shaking, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. Ayla grabbed his arm, her grip fierce. You all right? She asked. Yeah, I think so. Ayla's father placed a hand on Colt's shoulder and spoke. Ayla translated. He say, you brave and stupid, but mostly brave. Colt almost laughed. I'll take it. They rode back to the valley in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. When they reached camp, the people were waiting, and when they saw the warriors returning unharmed, a cheer went up. Colt dismounted and stood there, dazed, as people clapped him on the back and thanked him in words he didn't understand. It was overwhelming, too much. He slipped away from the crowd and walked to the edge of camp, needing space to breathe. Ayla found him a few minutes later. She didn't say anything, just sat down beside him and leaned her head on his shoulder. You stay, she said finally. Yeah, I stay. Good. They sat like that for a long time, watching the sun set over the valley, and Colt realized something he hadn't let himself believe in years. He was home. Not because of the place, because of the people. The weeks that followed were quieter. The soldiers didn't come back. Word spread through the territory that the Apache camp in the valley was off limits, and whether it was because of Ayla's father's reputation or Hayward's pride, Colt didn't know. But it held. Colt settled into the rhythm of camp life. He learned more of the language, enough to hold basic conversations. He hunted with the men, learned to track game through the mountains, learned to read the land the way they did. And at night, he sat with Ayla by the fire, and they talked about everything and nothing. One evening, as the first snow of the season started to fall, Ayla's father called Colt to his wickiup. The old man looked tired, his injury still bothering him, but his eyes were sharp. He spoke, and Ayla translated. He say, you prove yourself. You part of us now, but he want give you something, to make it official. The old man reached into a leather pouch and pulled out a small object. It was a pendant, carved bone on a leather cord, etched with symbols Colt didn't recognize. He say, this belonged to my brother. He wear it when he die. My father want you have it, as sign you family now. Colt's throat closed up. He took the pendant carefully, turning it over in his hands, feeling the weight of it. I don't know what to say, he managed. He say, you not need say anything. You already say it, by staying, by fighting, by being here. Colt nodded, then slipped the cord over his head. The pendant rested against his chest, warm and solid. Thank you, he said quietly. Ayla's father smiled, a rare, genuine smile, and placed a hand on Colt's shoulder. He spoke one more time, and Ayla's voice was soft. He say, welcome home, son. Colt couldn't speak. He just nodded, blinking hard against the sting in his eyes. That night, Colt and Ayla sat on their ridge, watching the snow fall. The valley below was quiet, the fires glowing warm against the cold. You happy? Ayla asked. Colt thought about it, really thought about it, and realized that for the first time in 10 years, the answer was yes. Yeah, he said. I am. Ayla smiled and took his hand. Good, because I not let you leave now. Wouldn't dream of it. They sat in silence for a while, the snow dusting their shoulders, the stars hidden behind clouds. Then Ayla reached into her pouch and pulled out something small and wrapped in cloth. She handed it to him. What's this? Colt asked. Open it. He unwrapped the cloth and found a small carving, a horse, made from dark wood, worn smooth by years of handling. My mother make this for me when I child, Ayla said. She say it represent freedom, strength. I want you have it. Colt stared at the carving, his chest tight. Ayla, I can't take this. You already did. He looked at her, and she was smiling, her eyes bright despite the cold. You give me life back, she said. This just small thing. But it mean you not alone. You have me, always. Colt's hand closed around the carving, and he pulled Ayla close, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, and they sat like that, watching the snow fall, and Colt thought about Daniel, about the guilt he'd carried for so long, about how he'd convinced himself that the only way to honor his brother's memory was to stop living. But sitting here with Ayla beside him and a future he'd never thought he'd have stretching out before him, Colt realized something. Daniel wouldn't have wanted him to spend his life in the dark. He would have wanted him to live, to find joy, to forgive himself. And maybe, just maybe, Colt was finally ready to do that. The winter passed slowly, the camp hunkered down against the cold, and life became a cycle of survival, hunting, gathering firewood, keeping the fires burning. Colt threw himself into the work, grateful for the distraction, grateful for the exhaustion that let him sleep without nightmares. By the time spring arrived, Colt felt like a different man, stronger, calmer, more at peace than he'd been in years. The pendant from Ayla's father hung around his neck, and the carved horse sat on a small shelf in his wickiup, a reminder of everything he'd found here. One morning, as the snow melted and the first green shoots started pushing through the ground, Ayla's father called another council. This time the tone was different, not urgent, not fearful, just thoughtful. He spoke for a long time, and Colt listened, picking out words here and there, but mostly reading the room. When the old man finished, the warriors nodded, and the meeting broke up. Ayla found Colt afterward and explained. My father say, camp need grow, need more people. He say we make peace with other bands, bring families together, make strong again. That's good, Colt said. Your people need that. He also say, you part of that. You help. Colt blinked. Me? How? You white. You know white world. You help us talk to traders, settlers who not want fight. You bridge. Colt thought about that. It made sense in a way. He understood both worlds, even if he didn't fully belong to either. And maybe that was the point. Maybe being in between wasn't a weakness. Maybe it was a strength. All right, he said. I'll help. Ayla smiled. Good, because you not have choice. Colt laughed. Yeah, I figured. As the months passed, Colt found his place. He helped negotiate trades with nearby settlements, using his knowledge of English and his understanding of frontier politics to broker deals that benefited the camp. He taught some of the younger warriors how to use rifles, how to maintain them, how to fight the way soldiers fought, and slowly, carefully, he built a life. He and Ayla grew closer, their bond deepening into something neither of them could quite name, but both of them understood. They didn't talk about the future, didn't make promises they couldn't keep, just lived, day by day, and let that be enough. One evening, nearly a year after Colt had first arrived at the camp, Ayla's father pulled him aside. The old man looked older now, the injury and the hard winter having taken their toll, but his eyes were still sharp. He spoke, and Ayla translated. He say, he proud of you. You come here broken. Now you whole. That take courage. Colt's throat tightened. I'm not sure I'm whole, but I'm trying. He say that all anyone can do, try, and keep trying. The old man reached out and gripped Colt's shoulder, and Colt realized with a jolt that this man, this warrior, this leader, had become the father he'd never really had, not by blood, but by choice. Thank you, Colt said quietly, for everything. Ayla's father nodded, then spoke one more time. Ayla's voice was soft. He say, you not thank him. You earn it. You earn place here. You earn family. And that's something no one can take from you. Colt nodded, not trusting himself to speak. That night, Colt stood on the ridge alone, looking out at the valley. The campfires glowed below, warm and steady. The stars were bright overhead, the same stars he'd stared at for 10 years while trying to figure out how to keep living. He thought about Daniel, about the guilt that had eaten him alive for so long. And he realized something. The guilt wasn't gone. It probably never would be. But it didn't control him anymore. He'd learned to carry it without letting it crush him, learned to honor his brother's memory by living instead of hiding. And that felt like enough. Colt heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Ayla standing there, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. You all right? She asked. Yeah, I'm all right. She stepped up beside him and looked out at the valley. You think about leaving? Sometimes, but not seriously. What changed your mind? Colt looked at her, at the firelight catching the angles of her face, at the strength and stubbornness and kindness written into every line. You, he said simply. This place. The people. I spent 10 years running from the past. I don't want to run anymore. Ayla smiled and took his hand. Good, because I still not let you go. Colt laughed and pulled her close. They stood like that for a long time, watching the stars. And Colt thought about everything he'd lost and everything he'd found. And he realized that maybe, just maybe, the broken parts of him had always been there for a reason. Not to punish him, but to teach him how to heal. The morning Ayla left, the sky was the color of bruised plums, dark and heavy, with the promise of rain. Colt had known it was coming. Her father's condition had worsened over the past 2 weeks, and the medicine woman had said he didn't have much time left. Ayla needed to be with him, needed to say goodbye. But knowing it was coming didn't make it any easier. Colt helped her prepare for the journey, packed food, checked her horse, made sure she had everything she needed. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. When she was ready to go, she turned to him, her expression unreadable. You not come? She asked. Colt shook his head. Your father needs you, not me. This is family time. You family too. I know, but you need to do this without me looking over your shoulder. Ayla's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Then she reached into her pouch and pulled out something small and wrapped in leather. She pressed it into his hand. What's this? Colt asked. Open it later. When I gone. Ayla, promise me. Colt looked at her, then nodded. I promise. She stepped closer and wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight. Colt held her back, his chest aching, and tried to memorize the moment. The way she felt. The way she smelled like sage and smoke. The way her heart beat against his. I come back, she whispered. I promise. I know. She pulled back and looked up at him, her eyes wet but steady. Then she kissed him, quick and fierce, and mounted her horse before he could say anything. Colt watched her ride away, her figure growing smaller and smaller until she disappeared over the ridge. Then he stood there for a long time, the wrapped leather package heavy in his hand, and tried to figure out how to breathe around the weight in his chest. Finally, he unwrapped the package. Inside was a small beaded bracelet, the kind Apache women made for their families. The beads were blue and white and black, woven into a pattern Colt didn't recognize. But he didn't need to recognize it to understand what it meant. It meant she was coming back. It meant he wasn't alone. Colt tied the bracelet around his wrist and walked back to camp, and for the first time in his life, he believed in the future. The days without Ayla were strange and hollow. Colt threw himself into work, helping repair the wickiups damaged by the winter storms, hunting with Naalnish and the other warriors, teaching the children how to skip stones in the creek. But every night, he sat by the fire and stared at the ridge where she'd disappeared, waiting. 2 weeks later, she came back. Colt saw her first, a lone rider cresting the ridge at sunset, silhouetted against the orange sky. His heart stopped. Then he was running, boots pounding against the dirt, and by the time she dismounted, he was there. She looked tired. Her eyes were red, her face drawn, but she was smiling. He's gone, she said quietly. He died 3 days ago, peaceful. Colt pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried. She didn't sob, didn't break down. Just let the tears come, quiet and steady. And Colt held her through it. When she finally pulled back, she wiped her face and looked at him. He say something. Before he die. He say, tell Colt he proud. Tell him he good son. Colt's throat closed up. He nodded, unable to speak. Ayla reached up and touched his face, her hand warm against his cheek. You wearing bracelet? Yeah. Good. That mean you understand. Understand what? That you mine now, and I not let you go. Colt laughed, the sound breaking through the tightness in his chest. I wouldn't dream of it. She smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The camp mourned Ayla's father for 3 days, and then life moved on the way it always did. Naalnish took over as leader, young and untested, but determined to honor the old man's legacy. Colt stood beside him, offering advice when asked, staying out of the way when not. And slowly, carefully, Colt and Ayla built something new. Not a life free of pain or fear or uncertainty, but a life built on trust, on choice, on the belief that broken things could be made whole again if you gave them time and care. One evening, nearly 2 years after Colt had first stumbled into Ayla's life, they sat on their ridge and watched the sun set. The valley below was green and alive, the camp thriving. Children played near the creek. Smoke rose from the cooking fires. It looked like peace. "You happy?" Ayla asked. Colt thought about it. Thought about the man he'd been 2 years ago, hollow, guilty, waiting to die. Thought about the man he was now, scarred, imperfect, but alive in a way he hadn't been in years. "Yeah," he said, "I'm happy." Ayla smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "Good, because you stuck with me now. Could be worse. Could be better." "No," Colt said, wrapping his arm around her. "It really couldn't." They sat like that until the stars came out, and Colt thought about Daniel, about the guilt he'd carried for so long, about the life he'd almost thrown away because he couldn't forgive himself. And he realized something he should have known all along. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It wasn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It was about choosing to live anyway, choosing to believe that the future could be different, choosing to let the broken parts heal, even if the scars never fully went away. Colt looked down at the bracelet on his wrist, then at the woman beside him, and he thought about everything he'd lost and everything he'd found. And for the first time in 10 years, he wasn't just surviving. He was living, and that was enough.